Russia had calculated that Poland would remain a passive corridor, a quiet rear area where logistics flowed freely and NATO's eastern flank stayed predictably static. However, on March 11, 2026, Poland executed a coordinated infrastructure maneuver that severed three critical transit arteries simultaneously, leaving an estimated 80,000 Russian troops in the Kaliningrad Oblast cut off from their primary resupply chains within 72 hours. This was not a routine diplomatic protest or a symbolic gesture of solidarity with Ukraine. This was the most consequential logistical strike against Russian forward positioning since the war began, and it happened without a single shot being fired. The images you are about to see on your screens document something that military analysts at the Institute for the Study of War described as a structural inflection point in NATO's eastern posture. What you are witnessing is not conventional warfare. It is something far more sophisticated, far more calculated, and far more dangerous for Moscow's long-term strategic position in the Baltic theater. There are three distinct mechanisms Poland deployed to produce this outcome, and each one alone would have been significant. Combined, they have created a situation from which Russia's Kaliningrad garrison has no clean exit. We will explain each in detail as this analysis unfolds. But first, to understand why this moment is so decisive, we need to descend to the geography that makes Kaliningrad simultaneously Russia's greatest strategic asset and its most exposed vulnerability. On the western edge of the Baltic Sea, separated from mainland Russia by approximately 350 kilometers of Polish and Lithuanian territory, sits Kaliningrad Oblast. This is not simply a Russian region. It is the home of the Baltic Fleet headquarters, housing S-400 air defense batteries, Iskander-M ballistic missile systems with ranges covering Warsaw, Berlin, and Stockholm, and a garrison force that Russian military planners have spent decades positioning as NATO's nightmare on its northern flank. According to the CSIS Europe Program Assessment published in February 2026, Kaliningrad represents the single most densely militarized territory per square kilometer within the entire European theater. Approximately 80,000 Russian military personnel, including Baltic Fleet sailors, air defense crews, and ground force units, depend on a continuous resupply corridor running through Lithuania and the Suwalki Gap, the 104-kilometer land corridor connecting Poland to Lithuania that NATO military planners have identified as the alliance's most critical choke point. What Poland did on March 11th was not close that corridor militarily. It was something more elegant and in many ways more devastating. Poland's defense ministry announced a comprehensive dual-use infrastructure suspension citing safety inspections and national security assessments under Article 43 of the EU's updated Critical Infrastructure Protection Directive. 3 rail transit lines carrying approximately 67% of Kaliningrad's civilian and military cargo were suspended indefinitely. Simultaneously, Polish customs authorities implemented enhanced screening protocols on all road freight crossing Polish territory toward the Lithuanian border, producing effective processing times of 96 to 144 hours per vehicle. The third mechanism was quieter but perhaps most significant. According to preliminary reports from Radio Free Europe's Vilnius bureau, Poland coordinated with Lithuania to suspend the special economic provisions that had previously exempted certain categories of dual-use goods from the broader EU sanctions framework governing Russia. The combined effect was immediate. Within 48 hours, satellite imagery analyzed by open-source intelligence monitors at Bellingcat showed significant reductions in vehicle movement along the primary transit routes feeding Kaliningrad from the east. By 72 hours, the Kaliningrad garrison's external resupply had dropped to an estimated 23% of its baseline operational requirement. 80,000 troops were not surrounded in any classical military sense, but they were, for all practical purposes, stranded. This is where things get genuinely remarkable. Poland did not act impulsively. According to German intelligence assessments shared with Bundestag Security Committee members and subsequently reported by Der Spiegel on March 13th, Warsaw had been coordinating this action with Brussels, Vilnius, and Washington for a minimum of 6 weeks. The timing was deliberate. It coincided with the conclusion of the largest NATO exercise in Baltic history, Dragon Shield 2026, which had positioned 34,000 alliance troops within rapid response distance of the Suwalki Gap. Poland's action was not the opening move of a crisis. It was the final piece of a carefully constructed strategic architecture that had been assembled under Russia's observation without Moscow fully recognizing its implications. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov appeared on state television within 24 hours, accusing Poland of conducting what he called an act of hybrid aggression, violating international transit obligations. But that reaction, loud as it was, concealed something far more troubling for the Kremlin. Russia had no clean response option available. Now we must examine why Russia's position is structurally far worse than the raw numbers suggest, because the 80,000 figure understates the actual strategic exposure. The Kaliningrad garrison's operational effectiveness is not simply a function of troop numbers. It depends on a continuous logistics pipeline delivering fuel, ammunition, spare parts for Iskander systems, maintenance components for S-400 batteries, and food supplies for a force that cannot sustain itself from local production. According to the Royal United Services Institute's February 2026 assessment of Russian Baltic logistics, Kaliningrad's internal storage capacity under normal operational conditions provides approximately 21 to 28 days of full readiness sustainment. After that threshold, combat effectiveness begins degrading. Air resupply through Kaliningrad's Krabrovo airport represents a theoretical alternative, but the airport's capacity is severely limited, and Russian Il-76 transport aircraft attempting regular resupply runs would be operating within range of Polish and Lithuanian air defense systems that have been substantially upgraded with Patriot PAC-3 batteries and NASAMS installations since 2022. The airlift option exists on paper. In operational reality, it is neither sufficient nor survivable at scale. Russia's Baltic Fleet, which theoretically provides a sea resupply corridor, faces a different problem. Since Finland and Sweden joined NATO, the Baltic Sea has become, in the words of NATO's Supreme Allied Commander Europe Admiral Stuart Munch, essentially a NATO lake. Every Russian naval movement from St. Petersburg toward Kaliningrad must transit waters now patrolled by 9 NATO navies with comprehensive undersea surveillance infrastructure. Let us move the camera slightly eastward, because what is happening in Kaliningrad cannot be separated from what is simultaneously happening along Russia's entire western strategic perimeter. Poland's action on March 11 did not occur in isolation. It represents the operational manifestation of a strategic transformation that Warsaw has been executing with extraordinary discipline since 2022. Poland has now increased its defense spending to 7% of GDP, exceeding every NATO ally, including the United States. Its land forces, currently at 180,000 personnel with a legislated pathway to 300,000, represent Europe's largest army by active headcount. The Polish inventory now includes 250 American Abrams M1A2 SEPV-3 tanks, 800 K2 Black Panther tanks from South Korea, and 48 FA-50 light combat aircraft with additional F-35A deliveries scheduled through 2026 and 2027. The €5 billion Eastern Shield fortification program is constructing a layered defensive network along the Belarusian and Russian borders that defense analysts at Rand Corporation have assessed as exceeding Warsaw Pact defensive standards at their Cold War peak. But the truly important detail is not what Poland is building. It is what Poland has become. Warsaw is no longer a nation preparing to defend itself. It is a nation that has moved to active strategic shaping of its security environment, and March 11th was the clearest demonstration yet of that transformation. The reaction inside Russia's political class reveals something that official statements are designed to conceal. Russian state media's response to Poland's infrastructure suspension followed a pattern that Kremlin watchers at the Chatham House Russia and Eurasia program have identified as characteristic of genuine strategic distress rather than performative outrage. When Russian messaging simultaneously accuses an adversary of provocative aggression, warns of unspecified consequences, and invokes international legal obligations, it typically signals that no effective countermeasure exists. Putin's options in response to Poland's action are structurally constrained in ways that his public posture cannot acknowledge. Military escalation against Poland triggers Article 5 and transforms a logistical crisis into an existential one. Legal challenges through international bodies offer no meaningful timeline for relief when a garrison is consuming its sustainment reserves. Economic retaliation against Poland is limited by the fact that Russia's leverage over European energy markets has been systematically dismantled since 2022. What remains is noise, and the Kaliningrad garrison, burning through its 21 to 28-day sustainment window, cannot be sustained on noise. The man behind the decisions being made in Moscow right now is not calculating from a position of strength. He is calculating from a position where every available option carries costs that a military already absorbing losses exceeding 900,000 casualties across the Ukrainian theater cannot easily absorb. There is a human reality inside this strategic abstraction that deserves examination. The 80,000 personnel in Kaliningrad are not abstract variables in a geopolitical equation. They are soldiers and sailors who woke up on March 12 to find that the routine resupply cadence they depended on had, without warning, been suspended. According to reports from Kaliningrad-based independent journalist Irina Tumanova, published through Meduza on March 14 before her website was again blocked by Roskomnadzor, local military commissariats were already receiving unusual inquiries about emergency family provisions by the third day of the transit suspension. The Iskander battery crews maintaining operational readiness under degraded logistics conditions face a specific technical problem. These systems require regular maintenance cycles and component replacements that cannot be indefinitely deferred. An Iskander battery that cannot be properly maintained is not simply less effective. It becomes a liability, a system with reduced reliability at the precise moment operational demands would be highest. For the Russian soldiers assigned to Kaliningrad's garrison, the strategic geometry has shifted around them without their consent and without any clear resolution timeline. This is what strategic isolation looks like before it becomes something worse. Looking toward the coming weeks and months, several trajectories are now in motion simultaneously, and the convergence of their timelines creates a decision window for both Russia and NATO that may prove to be one of the most consequential in the post-Cold War European security architecture. In the immediate term, Russia faces pressure to negotiate some form of transit restoration before the garrison's sustainment timeline creates operational degradation that becomes visible to international observers. This negotiation, if it occurs, would require Russia to accept conditions that validate the legitimacy of Poland's action, which itself carries strategic costs for Moscow's narrative of Western aggression. In the medium term, the success of Poland's infrastructure maneuver is already being studied by Baltic state planners in Tallinn, Riga, and Vilnius as a template for non-kinetic strategic pressure that falls below the threshold of armed conflict but produces effects that conventional military operations would require significant forces to achieve. According to Estonian Defense Ministry officials speaking on background to Reuters on March 15, the precedent established by Warsaw has opened a conceptual space that did not clearly exist before. In the longer term, the Kaliningrad situation may force a fundamental reassessment of Russia's forward positioning strategy in the Baltic, because an asset that can be isolated through administrative and infrastructure measures at the will of neighboring NATO states is not a strategic asset in the traditional sense. It is a hostage. The implications extend well beyond European geography. Beijing is watching this situation with the specific analytical focus of a government that has invested enormously in external access dependencies of its own. China's leadership has spent the past decade constructing what it describes as the world's most capable naval force, but that force's operational reach depends on supply chains, basing arrangements, and transit rights that share structural similarities with Russia's Kaliningrad position. If a coalition of determined middle powers can effectively neutralize a nuclear-armed great power's forward position through coordinated administrative action, the lesson for Taiwan Strait contingency planning is one that neither Beijing nor Taipei will file without serious annotation. The Polish precedent is not just a European story. It is a data point in every ongoing calculation about what coercive statecraft looks like when conducted by democracies with disciplined strategic patience. What your thoughts are on this extraordinary development and what you believe Russia's next move must be belongs in the comments section below, because this story is moving faster than any single analysis can capture. The comment thread on this video has become something worth reading in its own right. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and to like this video, because the next analysis in this series will examine what happens inside Kaliningrad if the transit suspension extends beyond 30 days, and the findings from that assessment will change how you understand the entire Baltic security architecture. Poland set out to do something that conventional military logic said was impossible: to neutralize Russia's most provocative forward position without firing a weapon, without triggering Article 5, and without giving Moscow a clear adversary to retaliate against. On March 11, 2026, Warsaw demonstrated that the rules of great power competition have been quietly rewritten by democracies that chose patience over provocation and precision over force. The 80,000 troops in Kaliningrad are not prisoners of Poland. They are prisoners of Russia's own strategic overextension, caught in a trap that Russia built, maintained, and then walked into believing it was a fortress. Presented by TGN. Thank you for choosing us.